Welcome everybody. Can you hear me well? Can I get a little thumbs up if you can hear me well? Brilliant. Welcome everybody to our session on mapping career causeways, supporting workers at risk. Our two speakers today will be Dr. Cath Sleeman and Dr. Karlis Kanders. We will also be joined by Professor Tom Calvert, who is going to introduce the TalTech Industrial Project. So before we start the session, I just wanted to share a few housekeeping items with you all today. So the workshop is recorded, as you can see. The slide deck of the workshop is going to be shared with you after the presentation, so no need to take notes. Please do share your questions in the chat box at the bottom of your screen. We will have a Q&A session at the end of the workshop, but do feel free to share your comments and questions and feedback in the chat box. I'll be happy to relay it with our speakers at the end. Zoom has different functionalities, as you all know. So at the top right-hand corner of your screen, you can either use a gallery view to see all the people who are joining the session, or you can maybe pin the speaker, the person who is talking, to see their screen. We will all be sharing our screen at some point, so please bear with us if the technology is not on our side. I will kindly ask you to all mute yourself. I think you've all done that already. This is brilliant so that we don't have any disruptive echoes or noises when people are doing their presentation. And last but not least, please do feel free to switch on or switch off your camera as you please. So in terms of the agenda of the day, please bear with me. So I am now going to introduce you our two speakers, Dr. Cath Sleeman and Dr. Karlis Kanders, and then Professor Calvert is going to briefly introduce us the TalTech Industrial Project, which this presentation is part of. And then Dr. Cath Sleeman and Dr. Karlis Kanders are going to share their findings and all the work they've done on the Open Job project, mapping career causeways, the methodology that they used, and how mapping the impacts of shocks can support workers at risk of losing their work. We will have, as I said, a Q&A session at the end, and we will promptly finish the presentation, the workshop, at 3 p.m. So now, our two speakers of the day are Dr. Cath Sleeman, who is the head of data discovery in the data analytics practice at NESTA. So she leads on projects that identify and fill gaps in data ecosystems. Her projects show the potential of novel data and methods to deliver new insights, and her work blends economics, data science, and creative data visualization. Our next speaker of the day is Dr. Karlis Kanders, who is Senior Data Foresight Lead in the Discovery team at NESTA, and he uses machine learning and network analysis to uncover emerging trends, promising technologies, and interventions that will shape our future. And I forgot to introduce myself. My name is Tiffany. I'm a program manager at NESTA, and I'm the host of the day. So without further ado, I will hand over to Professor Tom Calvert from the Italian University of Technology, who is going to share with us a few information about the TalTech Industrial Project. If you wouldn't mind unmuting yourself, Professor Calvert, my apologies, I will leave you the floor.
Yes, thank you, Tiffany. Thank you for this very kind introduction, and welcome also from my side to the workshop. And I won't take up too much time, just to remind ourselves that we have this fantastic TalTech industrial project going on, and the EU was generous enough to grant us some funding to increase the industrial strategy, industrial policy competencies at TalTech in our department, and for which we built up a really fantastic consortia. We have NESTA included there, who is hosting today's seminar, and I'm really grateful for today's speakers for finding time to share some of their great experience to us. And also have the Universities of Bocconi and Aalto in the consortium. And just as a small heads up, we will have more seminars like this coming up already in December. You can expect the announcement tomorrow, and many more actually in January, where a lot of interesting topics will be presented. And so this is one of the core kind of the projects of the activities of the project, but also we have a staff exchange. We have also work on new research ideas and new proposals and so on. So if this kind of presentation and this kind of research triggers your interest, then don't hesitate to get in touch with us. You can visit our website, TalTech, but also we keep our LinkedIn site updated on the forthcoming events. So if you are interested in this, please do subscribe, and you'll get announcements when the new seminars are coming up. And I'm looking forward for the interesting seminar today, and please do participate actively also. So thank you. Back to you, Tiffany.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Professor Karlis. I am now going to stop sharing my screen, and Dr. Cath Sleeman is going to introduce her work with you all.
Thank you so much. I'm just going to share my screen 1 second. Can you see that slide clearly? Brilliant. So I'm Cath, and I thought I'd start by just describing a little bit about NESTA and how we've come to work in the area of open jobs or labour market information. So NESTA is an innovation foundation. We're based here in the UK with our central office in London, and our objective is to design, test and scale solutions to some of the largest problems that society is facing. Last year we had a large structural review, and the new NESTA will focus on these 3 mission areas. Each mission has a main focus or a primary focus and a secondary focus. So the Fairer Start mission focuses on reducing inequality in early childhood, with a secondary focus on reducing the gap in secondary skills. The Healthy Lives mission primarily focuses on reducing obesity, with a secondary focus on reducing loneliness. And the Sustainable Future mission has a primary focus on reducing the carbon emissions of households, with a secondary focus on productivity. And that's where that secondary focus on improving the UK's growth and productivity, that's where all the work that I'm going to talk about today fits in. The way in which we're aiming to increase growth and productivity is through improving labour market information. In the UK, we have 3 large gaps in LMI. We have very little data on the transitions that people make between occupations. So there is no official data on, say, the number of people who start off as economists and then become data scientists, as I did. We have no timely or regular data on skill demand, so what skills are being demanded by employers. That's really important for careers advice. We have one survey, it's once every 2 years. And we have no granular or regular data on green jobs or skills. We have no official definition of green jobs in the UK. That means that although there's now lots of interest in people wanting to move into green jobs and acquire green skills, it can be difficult for them to know exactly what job titles they should be searching for. The reason these skill gaps have kind of come to be, there's kind of several reasons behind it. Quite a few types of LMI in the UK have been commodified. So if you want access to this information, you'd need to buy it. It's not publicly provided. Certain key variables are not collected or published. And we have a lack of agreed upon frameworks or taxonomy. So we don't have an official skills taxonomy in the UK, and that can lead groups to use different taxonomies. I think the greatest problem, though, is that in the UK, no single group owns this problem of missing labour market information. So there are lots of groups doing great work trying to fill in these gaps, but there's no one kind of overarching group. What's nice, though, is that there's real impetus that's been developed over the last 6 months to fill in these gaps and to recognise that they're there. So I get the feeling that we're on the right track. So today, I'll just go back to the slide. Just lastly, before I move on to today's project, the reason that missing LMI is important is that it can hinder productivity, and through lots of different channels, so not just one channel. I won't go through the whole slide, but just to give a couple of examples. If an employer doesn't know that the skills that they need to ask for in a particular job that they're advertising, then they may ask for the wrong skills and you get the wrong applicants, and this leads to under or overskilled workers. If a job seeker doesn't know that there is another industry that requires very similar skills to the one that they have, to the skills that they have, then they may end up spending longer in unemployment, and that can lead to what's called skills erosion. And so there are all these channels through which poor or missing labour market information can impact on productivity. And there are these other spillover effects there, just kind of outlined at the bottom of the slide too. So if people don't know what green jobs or what specific green jobs or green skills are, then that may slow the green transition. And likewise, as I mentioned before, if employers don't know exactly what skills they should be asking for, then they may fall back on asking for a degree. And that can create a kind of degree glass ceiling whereby people who do have the right skills for the job can't get those positions because they don't have the right qualification. So there are lots of different routes through which poor or missing labour market information can impact on productivity. And Mapping Career Causeways is the project that we're going to be talking about today, and it's focused all on filling that first gap in labour market information that I mentioned, which was that we don't have much information on the transitions that people make between different jobs. And this piece of work was funded by the JP Morgan Chase Foundation. And it has two aims. The kind of narrow aim is to identify those workers whose jobs we think are at risk of automation, and to provide really practical advice to those workers on other jobs that are at lower risk of automation that they could transition into, so more secure jobs that they could move into from their current jobs. But there's a broader aim as well, and that's to develop a methodology that we can use to measure the resilience of workers to different shocks, like the automation shock, but not just that, perhaps things like COVID as well. And then to develop an algorithm that we could use to automatically recommend transitions to those workers. So other jobs that require similar skills to the current jobs that have been impacted by the specific shock. So today I'll give you a brief overview of the project. We published two kind of large pieces of work from this. The first was the report itself, which goes into real detail about the methodology that we used, and that's available on our website. And then we also published a user guide, which is more kind of practical information for careers advisors, policymakers and employers. I'll just provide like a brief overview of the project, and then Karlis will go into a lot more detail on the methodology. So the project involved looking at 1,600 different occupations and effectively just measuring the similarity between those different jobs. Similarity in terms of the skills that they require, the work activities, the different kind of contexts in which the work is performed. And the way we did that is by using natural language processing and comparing all those statements about skills and work activities and contexts and seeing how similar they were across different jobs. And this map is the result of having calculated those similarities. So every dot here is a job, or it shows 1,600 different dots. And if two dots are closer to each other, it means we think they're more similar in terms of the skills and work activities that they require. So what you see is that you get these groups of similar occupations. So all the occupations to do with healthcare get grouped together, and all the occupations to do with education get grouped together. What we can then do, this is the same map, we shifted it slightly to the left. We can then colour in these dots by the risk of automation, or what's technically the suitability for machine learning. And those dots that are in red are at higher risk of automation. And what you see in the kind of main finding of the study has been that what we see is there are groups of high risk jobs. So not if you're in the middle of one of those groups in a job, not only is your job at risk of automation, but those jobs that are similar to yours, that require similar skills, those jobs that you might look to transition into if your job disappeared, they're also at high risk of automation. And that's a really important finding. Up until now, most automation studies have just assessed the risk of automation for each occupation independently. But in fact, what really matters is not just the risk that your job will be automated, but those jobs around you will be automated as well. And so now we're changing the size of the dot to represent how many viable and desirable transitions you have. So how many other jobs you could transition into from your current role. And what we see is that those workers in high-risk occupations, high risk of automation, they have fewer transition options to lower risk roles that offer similar or higher salary. And you can see this map online. So we've published it alongside the report. And then we've also, I wonder if this will work. Oh, it's a bit blurry. We also looked at the case of a shop assistant. So a shop assistant is a one occupation that we've identified that's at high risk of automation. And so in this data visualization, it's on the same page as the last link. We work through and we look at the viable transition. So the other jobs that a shop assistant might be able to transition into, and we consider the different aspects of those alternative jobs. Let me just play it and see if it. So we're just focusing on these top transition options. We're looking at different skills that they require, the salaries that they pay, because that's important. And crucially, we also look at their risk of automation, because what we found initially is that those similar occupations, those most viable transitions, are also at high risk of automation. And so what we can do is we can take out those jobs that are at high risk of automation and replace them with the most similar alternatives that are slightly less similar than those ones at the top, but they're at lower risk of automation. And we can also look at the risk that they're exposed to, that in those roles you're exposed to COVID-19 because they involve close interaction with customers, for example. We can take out those jobs, replace them with the next most similar occupations that are at lower risk of exposure to COVID, and so on and so forth, until we get to a group of occupations that we think are fairly low risk, that still have some similarity, or require some similar skills to those required by a shop assistant. And so the aim of this visualization is just to show how this information from the report can be used to enrich and improve careers advice. So that's just a very brief overview of our research. Let me see if I can move on. I might just stop sharing there, and I'll ask Karlis. I'll ask Karlis to start sharing. I think there's one more slide that I may have missed. It's just talking about the kind of, thanks Karlis, the kind of practical use cases for this kind of map of occupation. So as I mentioned, we hope that it can help recommend transitions between jobs by pointing out people's what we call their viable and desirable transitions. But what we can also do is provide skill recommendations. So if someone knows the job that they want to move into, they're a shop assistant and they want to become an IT help desk agent, we can identify the skill gaps between those two jobs. So if they're looking for training, hopefully that just makes it easier to find the right training course to make that transition. And then lastly, for policymakers, we can provide broader information that would hopefully support those workers that are at risk. I'll leave it there then, and hopefully I think Karlis is going to talk to us a little bit, kind of dive into the methodology of the piece and how we created this algorithm to measure the similarity between different jobs.
Thank you, Cath. And just wanted to say I'm really happy to also be here and participate in the seminar. And also just to know that my Wi-Fi is a little bit temperamental today, so do let me know if I'm breaking up a bit too much. And then I'll quickly find a better spot in the flat. So yeah, let me spend a few more minutes now to give you an overview of the methodology. And basically the project had three main steps. The first step was to measure the risk of automation for European occupations. And we did this by using automation estimates that were developed by Brynjolfsson, Mitchell, and Rock in an earlier study from 2018. And there they estimated the suitability for machine learning of thousands of tasks specified in the United States Occupational Information Network, which is also known as ONET. And we translated these estimates to occupations specified in the European Skills, Competencies, and Occupations Framework, which is called ESCO. And for this purpose, we had to develop the first direct crosswalk between the American and European frameworks. And then The second part of the project aimed to shift the focus onto the actual workers whose jobs are at risk, and there we identified demographic patterns using EU labor force survey for 3 countries, for UK, France, and Italy. But we won't go into detail about these demographic results. And here I'm showing you a graph where you can see all the analyzed ESCO occupations, and they're mapped here across 2 dimensions of automation. On the horizontal axis, you can see the overall automation risk. And in line with the original study by Brynjolfsson and colleagues, it is measured as the average of automation scores across all the tasks in the job. And the tasks are also weighted by their importance, which is a data point that we can also get from the ONIT database. And then on the vertical axis, you can see a novel measure of automation that shows the prevalence or the proportion of tasks that are automation bottlenecks, meaning that they are especially difficult to automate. And so we distinguished a group of occupations shown here as high risk. And the idea is that they have both a high average overall automation risk, and they also have a low prevalence of bottleneck tasks. And some examples include the hotel concierge, you can see here, as well as medical transcriptionists and investment clerks. And generally, the typical high-risk occupations were sales and services, as well as clerical, business and administration occupations, and financial associate professional jobs. The third and essential step of the project then was to build a career transitions recommendation algorithm to find transitions from the occupations that are at risk to other safer jobs. And so as a result, by joining up the European and American official occupational databases, we had generated detailed occupational profiles for the almost 3,000 occupations listed in the ESCO database. And so let me kind of show you the data, the actual data that we used to generate the recommendations for job transitions. So the ESCO from European Union forms the foundation for this. So they have in total, they have 3,000 occupations at different levels of granularity. And for our results in the report, we used the top level 1,600 occupations. And these 1,600 occupations, they have 13,000 plus skills, knowledge, attitudes, and values ascribed to them. You can see some of the skills of the hotel concierge example that we're showing here at the bottom of this graph, where you can see some of the essential skills, such as identify customers' needs or provide tourism-related information. And there are also skills that are designated as optional, such as maintain incident reporting records, for example. In addition, we also used ESCO skills hierarchy, which groups these very detailed essential and optional skills into categories which are related to more broader work activity types. And here you can see some examples like obtaining information verbally or negotiating. And then we combined this with data from ONIT, where we imported their work context features, which describe their interpersonal, structural, and physical work aspects. So for example, you can see the work context features here. These are things like how much you will have to use telephone in the job or have face-to-face discussions, as well as whether you have freedom to make decisions in your work, and also things like how much time is spent sitting or spent exposed outdoors to the weather. And this is just a subsample. There are in total about 57 such work context features. And then we also use another parameter from ONIT, which is called job zones. And these job zones compactly capture the expected education and experience level that the workers will need to have. And it ranges between 1 and 5, with 1 corresponding to occupations that need little or no preparation, such as, for example, laundry workers. And then job zone 5, to occupations that need extensive, long preparation, such as, for example, judges or doctors. Then for earnings, we used ASH, which is the UK's annual survey of hours and earnings. And then finally, we, of course, also use the automation scores and risk categories from our analysis. And then in addition to evaluate the impact of COVID-19, we also employed the remote labor index, which was developed by researchers from Oxford. So this is the data that we use to compare occupations and calculate similarity scores and evaluate whether transition is viable or not. So let me spend just a few minutes on how we did this, how we calculated these similarity scores. So we developed 4 similarity measures, and we used the different features that I just discussed in the previous slide in this calculation. So firstly, for comparing the essential and optional occupational skill sets, we used natural language processing, and we calculated numerical representations of the skills descriptions, which are called sentence embeddings. And we compared these numerical sentence embeddings and found the best pairwise skills matches between the pairs of occupations. And we call this measure the NLP adjusted overlap. And then we also created feature vectors that capture the intensity of the different types of work activities, and another feature vector which captures the intensity of different types of work context features. And we also compared the alignment of these vectors between different occupations. And then we combined these 4 measures simply by averaging them, and the resulting similarity measure appeared to work well to identify the most similar destination occupations. You can see some examples here. As the first example is a machinery technician, and you can see that it's been matched. So the 5 most similar occupations are also, they seem related, such as a machinery assembler or mechanic. And then you can see choreographers have been matched to dancers, and performance artists and teachers are matched to other teachers, and so on. So far so good. Then we also wanted to find a threshold similarity value. You can see the similarity values here. We wanted to find a threshold value which would tell us when a transition is viable or when is it unviable. And you know, because otherwise you just have this number, it could be 0.4, it could be 0.3, and we wanted to kind of have a more concrete value that tells us when does a transition become viable. And so for this, we calibrated these values by using the ESCO occupational hierarchy, which so it has several layers, and what we used is the 4-digit groups of ESCO occupations. And the assumption we made was that if occupations are within the same 4-digit ESCO group, then the transitions between them should be viable. And from this, we could infer the typical similarity value for viable transitions. For example, I can just a quick example. You have occupations such as halal butchers and kosher butchers and meat cutters, and they're all in the same ESCO 4-digit group. And so for this, we calculated the average similarity values between these very similar occupations, and this gave us an idea what the similar, sort of what a viable transition, what kind of similarity value it should have. You can see here basically the distribution of these viable similarity transition values, and from this we inferred that the typical threshold value that we set is 0.3. This is just to give you in kind of an overview of how that we also went through the pains to calibrate a bit our method. And so to summarize, the algorithm works as follows. So we built detailed occupational profiles using the ESCO and ONIT data, and then we measured occupational similarity by comparing the different features of occupations. And from this, we calibrated these similarity values and identified which transitions are viable, meaning that they have similar skills and work activities and work context, as well as education and experience level. And then we also identified desirable transitions by looking at the earnings. And we said that we want the transition occupation to have similar or higher earnings. And finally, of course, we also looked for occupations, the destination occupations that have a lower automation risk compared to your origin. So now in a few minutes, let me just walk through some of the main findings from our mapping of the impact of shocks. And here you can see the same landscape of occupations that Cath showed you just a few minutes ago, where each circle is an occupation and the color indicates the automation risk. And here we're showing on the left, we're showing the overall automation risk, and on the right, we have the second automation risk measure, which is the prevalence of bottleneck tasks. And so you can already see what we already established, what Cath just told you, that there is a strong localization of automation risk in this occupational landscape. And so although the risk of automation varies across occupations, jobs that require similar skills, perhaps unsurprisingly, tend to face also similar levels of risk. And what this underscores is that at-risk workers face this challenge of finding a job that is sufficiently similar to their current role so that it's viable, so that they have a viable transition, but it's also sufficiently dissimilar, such that it has a lower risk of automation. And this distribution of risk across occupations then also exacerbates the disparity between high risk and lower risk jobs. So what we found is that high risk occupations have an average 50% less desirable transition options. And we rule out the transitions that would push the worker into another high risk occupation. And so due to this localization, we find that many high risk jobs tend to concentrate in clusters. And you can see here in the graph on the right-hand side that the high-risk occupations are the dots in different colors, and the dots in gray are the lower risk occupations. And so to escape automation, workers need to leave the confines of their high-risk cluster, and as a result, forego many of the most readily available transition options. Then when we focus just on the high-risk occupations, and we find that there is also a large variation across different high-risk occupations, and the number of safe and desirable transitions can vary between 0 to more than 100. And on the right-hand side, you can see some examples of occupations with the least and most transition options. So here you can see that payroll clerks or amusement and recreation attendants, for example, are among the occupations that have no transitions we could find that are deemed viable. And so what this basically means is that some at-risk workers will need more support than others. Now, in terms of major occupational groups, the occupations with the greatest number of transitions were managers, professionals, as well as technicians and associate professionals. Whereas conversely, the elementary and clerical and service roles had the smallest number of transition options. One thing to note here is that, interestingly, there is also considerable variation within these occupational groups. And one interesting example is transport clerks, where we found that, for example, rail traffic controllers have no safe and desirable transitions, whereas water traffic coordinators, which are in the same ISCO 4-digit group, they have 10 such transitions. And the difference between these occupations is really in the detailed skills, which, so if you have skills related to communication or collaboration, as well as to organizing, planning, and scheduling, you can increase your safe and desirable transition options. What we also found was that high-risk workers with less training and work experience generally have lower mobility. Particularly, there's a twofold difference between occupations that are in the so-called job zone 2 and job zone 3. So intuitively, the difference between these job zones is that in job zone 2, there are occupations that may require a secondary school qualification and minimal previous work experience. And in contrast, in job zone 3, these occupations typically require a slightly more advanced level of experience and a vocational qualification. And the difference becomes even greater if we compare job zone 2 and job zone 4, where job zone 4 are occupations that typically require an undergraduate degree. And there, the difference between these two is fourfold. So what we find is that as kind of the either, so the job zone, what it entails is different types of training. It can be education, it can also be on-the-job training or related work experience. And so what we find is that all avenues of training, either through experience or education, appear to be associated with better worker mobility. Finally, just one more thing to show you. So in addition to analyzing potentially promising job transitions, our approach can also provide more detailed insights into the potentially transferable skills, as well as skills gaps that are associated with a specific transition or collection of transitions. And here we have an example of a shop assistant that wants to become a visual merchandiser, who is responsible for the visual display of goods in a shop. And we can compare the skills of both occupations. So these are the detailed ESCO skills. And we can find skills that are perfect matches. So these are skills that already the shop assistant has, and so we'd have no problem transferring to the new occupation. But then by using natural language processing, we can also find partial matches. And here, these are marked in yellow color. And one example here is the skill to identify customer needs. There is some similarity with the skill to liaise with appropriate staff for visual display. So both skills require some communication skill. And finally, in red, we can also highlight potential skills gaps. What is really nice is that we can rank these matches based on their similarity values. And so at the bottom of the list, you can see here skills that the shop assistant might be least familiar with. And these are really specific to the visual merchandiser role, such as to conduct research on trends in design or to interpret floor plans. And in the report, we also show how one can aggregate these skills matching scores across a collection of pathways between different sectors and obtain a broader picture about the most prevalent skills gaps. Then just to finish on my part here, the very last thing I wanted to highlight is a very interesting data set that we have collected since publishing this report. And we did a crowdsourcing study, and we have now our crowdsourced feasibility ratings that complement our kind of more data-driven similarity measures. And these feasibility ratings have been collected from almost 400 participants on a subset of job transitions. You can see we evaluated around 10,000 job transitions, and then we extended these ratings to all of these transitions, all the possible transitions between ESCO occupations by using a machine learning approach. And so these ratings reflect sort of a common sense judgment about the transitions, and we have already used it to fine tune the algorithm recommendations. And this data set is openly available for anyone who's interested in studying it further. So if you go to our GitHub, it will be very easy for you to find it. Thank you so much. And if you have any more questions, I'm happy to answer them during the Q&A. And also do reach out to us. And I'll give it back now to Cath Sleeman.
Thanks so much, Karlis. I'll just try and share my screen. If stop sharing yours. That's great, thanks. So we've heard about mapping career causeways. What I thought I'd do just in the last 10 minutes before we take some questions or have a bit of a discussion, I thought I'd mention one other project that we've been working on more recently that might be of interest to you. So mapping career causeways was all about measuring the similarities between different occupations so that we could, in the absence of having actual data on the movements that people make between occupations, we could measure the kind of theoretical similarity between different jobs. This project here, Open Jobs Observatory, is about filling in those other two gaps that I mentioned. So in the UK, we don't have very good data on skill demands, and we're still in the early stages of developing information on green jobs and skills. So what the Open Jobs Observatory is, it's a kind of repository of insights about the skills being requested by employers in UK job adverts. So what we've been doing since January of this year is we've been collecting job adverts on a daily basis from websites in the UK. And we do it with the permission of the job boards. We've reached out to them and asked for their permission to scrape their sites. And we scrape in the middle of the night, so it doesn't kind of interfere with anyone. Each weekend then, we run a series of algorithms that extracts information from those job adverts. And those algorithms include ones to extract all the skills mentioned within the text of the job advert. We extract locations, salaries, we assign job titles to occupations and things like that. And then what we want to do is we want to get to the point where on a monthly basis, we can then publish aggregate insights about skill demands. We've just started, so we published our first lot of insights in September, and we want to get into the pattern of kind of monthly publications. And we're at the point now where we're looking to further evaluate our algorithms to make sure they're as accurate as possible. We're refining the work there, and we're looking to partner with kind of organisations like local authorities to show how those insights can help in their work and tell them a little bit about what skills are being demanded in their areas by employers. So the observatory works, it's really built on a pipeline that we've constructed. So as I say, we scrape or collect job adverts on a daily basis, and we extract key information from those adverts. There's then quite a complicated deduplication process because lots of job adverts get posted multiple times, and the same job advert may not be posted in exactly the same way. So a sentence or two may kind of change between different postings. And so it's important that we can detect those so we're not double counting in any way. There's then an enrichment stage. So we need to annualize or standardize all our salaries. We assign locations to the same kind of geographic level. And we extract skills, and the skills algorithm was developed by Karlis, which is neat. And then the final stage is about aggregation. So it's trying to produce useful aggregate statistics on skill demands, things like what skills are being demanded in what regions of the country, what are the salaries that are being offered alongside different skills, as well as keywords and job adverts. So we can quite easily look for words like no experience required, and we can see how those types of jobs, those very low skilled jobs, are changing over time in kind of quantity and in their location as well. As I mentioned, we began collecting job adverts at the beginning of the year, and well, in August we had 2 million. I think we've now got over 3 million adverts, and we'll keep going. And hopefully we'll get into a rhythm of kind of publishing monthly data insights. This is just to give you a brief example of the types of insights that we want to be able to provide. So for those not familiar, this is a very stylized map of the UK based on, I think it's NUTS 2 regions. So we have Scotland at the top, Wales on the left-hand side, and the southern areas of England, Cornwall and Devon at the bottom, and London there on the lower right-hand side. And so what each kind of brick shows is how we take all the job adverts for a particular region, like London, and then we extract all the skills mentioned within those job adverts, and we assign those skills to broad skill groups. So there's a skills taxonomy that underlies this piece of work. So every skill kind of lives in a different part of the taxonomy. And at the top part of the taxonomy, we have those kind of 8 or so broad skill groups there on the left-hand side. And so we can say that of all the skills and all the job adverts for London, 12% mention information and communication technologies. And then we can say that, that's relatively more than in other regions of the UK. So not surprisingly, London has a specialty in ICT related skills. So that's one aspect. We can look at how skill demands are spread out over the UK. What we can also do, though, is we've developed an algorithm to detect green job adverts. So it automatically detects jobs for positions in green industries. And it does it by looking for keywords within the descriptions of the job adverts. So we have, actually it's a UN-based definition. It's called the Environmental Goods and Services Sector. It's a kind of definition of green sectors. And our Office for National Statistics, the ONS, published descriptions of each of those green sectors, things like recycling, solar energy, hydropower. And from those descriptions, we've been able to extract keywords like those I just mentioned, and we look for those keywords within the descriptions of job adverts. And so that what we hope over the longer term is that we'll be able to track that transition to net zero, so the growth in green jobs, and we'll be able to hopefully tell what areas of the country have more green jobs than others. We can also look at things like transversal skills, so those very general skills like communication, teamwork, that are required across many different jobs. Hopefully over time, as we collect more job adverts, we'll also be able to spot those skills that are emerging and those skills that are becoming redundant, potentially due to factors like automation, which we talked about earlier. So this is what we've published to date. We've got a homepage with some data visualizations like the one I just showed you. There's downloadable aggregate data on skill demands across regions and other variables. What we've also done, and what you might be interested in, we've published a lot of the code that we used to extract key variables from the job advert. So if you have your own data set of job adverts, and you might then be able to try out our green jobs algorithm to assess which of those adverts are green, or you could run our skills extraction algorithm to extract the skills in those job adverts. And they may need a bit, the algorithms may need a bit of kind of tinkering because every data set is different, but we thought it might just help others, and hopefully they can improve on our algorithms as well. We've also published a few articles there at the bottom left-hand corner, to walk people through our algorithms and to kind of justify the choices that we made. And then finally, we've published a couple of articles on our green jobs algorithm, which I talked about earlier. One that focuses on the methodology and the other focuses on the results. So at the moment, where are green jobs located across the UK? So that's our Open Jobs Observatory, and we're hoping to, keep working on this over the years to come. We see it as a kind of new piece of data infrastructure that will hopefully improve the supply of labour market information in the UK. So I'll leave it there just to say thank you so much for having us along, and I'm really happy to take any questions. And those are just a few links there to our work, but I'm sure we'll share the slides in due course.